Heyo, 2024 Bracket here. I just thought I'd make a disclaimer that this is a reworked version of my 2021 recap video, which was released in late March 2022. If you're wondering the need for the changes, I'll interject at various parts to explain those. Here's also a list of content warnings which I highly advise you read before continuing. Plus, as is standard with these old videos, some comments may be outdated or I no longer stand by them, but I'm still keeping a majority of them in. Anyways, the Reworked 2022 year in review starts now. 2021 can be described as a lot of things, but one thing I wouldn't consider it is a full-blown disappointment. Now sure, because 2020 felt like a universal shot in the arm, most were hyping up 2021 as the start of the healing process, and I admit that I kinda fell into this mindset too, being overly optimistic during the end of January. Other than that brief glimmer of hope, I was confident that the year was going to be much of the same even after expecting a less crappy year. A reminder that the pandemic is still roaring into 2022, and I expect it to continue until we as a planet actually make an effort to stop it. Even as cases decline, don't let your guard down on some other deadly variant emerging. Not to say we're doomed or anything, but if there's one thing to be disappointed by, it probably shouldn't be that. As for how we've handled the virus since, I didn't have all too much confidence even after the political administration changed. Largely because we're still deeply divided as a country, and that's a roadblock that is likely to stick around even if we do become more progressive. Oh, and also relying on liberal Democrats to fix America's issues will only get us so far in improving. They're politicians after all, meaning that they're inherently a pawn of corruption, whether that be internally, through corporate backing, or with their worthless attempts at bipartisanship. Now isn't the time for any of that, and any showing for the status quo will only drag us deeper into the pit. Then again, it's not like we have much of a choice, do we? Besides that, 2021 was honestly very uneventful, even as the world did start to recover before Omicron reset everything. Besides the January 6th insurrection opening the year on a sour note, that was fortunately not the norm. Though the fact it happened to begin with shows how deranged much of the GOP base has become. The one positive to come out of it was that we finally took the Q crazes as a serious threat. Just wish that it wasn't government-endorsed domestic terrorism that led to this. Though honestly, the thing that's had the longest lasting impact wouldn't be the chaotic state of political discourse, but rather an explosive trend that defined the year: crypto. While most didn't catch on to this phenomenon until summer, cryptocurrency and other related blockchain artifacts officially entered the mainstream consciousness early in the year. It's not hard to see why. The prospect of making it rich from investing or holding onto crypto items made plenty of fools buy into the trend. Actually, that alone couldn't explain why it blew up. After all, crypto is a tech innovation that's been around for years, with roots tracing back to the dot-com bubble of the 90s. But now big tech basically owns most of the world's economy, and in their quest of global dominance, had hopped onto this lucrative bandwagon for easy money. It's also worth mentioning that despite it being more publicly known, a great majority hold little to no interest in this ongoing fad. Most of the interest is coming from ultra-rich entrepreneurs like Lark Yuckyburger and Elephant Massgraves, along with their countless tech bro disciples of varying wealth but consistently massive egos. In other words, it's become big through gentrification and cults of personality, much like nearly every industry post-Reagan. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves for a moment as I explain why it likely caught on. 2021 actually began with a trend I'll refer to as Reddit meme stonks, nicknamed that because it was mostly Redditors using their COVID stimulus to invest in companies like GameStop and AMC Theaters via the biggest lottery/pyramid scheme in the world, the stock market. The most noteworthy and probably only good part of it was that they were flipping the bird at the banks and hedge funds. Long story short, their investments hurt the hedge funds because they couldn't afford the wave of shares flooding in. Unsurprisingly, trading companies started to limit or even hide stocks from the general public out of damage control. I don't think this really went anywhere besides that and would be forgotten mere months later, but it's worth noting that a lot of money was also put into crypto investments such as Bitcoin and Dogecoin around this time. Considering that this was huge in January, I feel like it directly correlates to the public's general hype for crypto and blockchain technology. Or maybe tech geeks with goals to be rich and powerful found a way to sucker in normies into this newly relevant industry at a convenient time, which would explain why it grew so inorganically. What better way to reel them in than by latching onto memes and other forms of pop culture? And this is where I get into the most puzzling and perhaps the worst element of the crypto boom: the boundless amount of non-fungible tokens being minted and distributed. It was a phenomenon that most didn't know how to react to, since they just blew up all of a sudden and were unfamiliar with the concept. That on its own sounds pretty bad, but that doesn't even touch on the loosest concept of ownership I've ever seen which is attached to them. Even though NFTs are advertised as collectible and show off images or other media you'll be getting, what you're actually owning is the link or receipt to that file. And because of that, anything can happen with that link at any time. For one, it can be changed to something different than what you actually spent your hard-earned Ethereum points on, or in the worst case scenario, the link either breaks or has its media removed. So for digital items that are designed to be sold and traded for profit, it shows shows how awful the concept is on a fundamental level. That didn't stop many of the biggest conglomerates and influential figures on the planet to latch onto this for their anarcho-capitalist fantasies. Pop culture artifacts were transformed into these tokens at rapid intensity, and yet another corporate takeover of a niche community. The crypto recruiters would also frequently lure in the creators behind past internet relics to bank on nostalgia, which in some cases resulted in those artifacts being purged to obtain exclusivity as tokens. There is no denying that this was a coordinated effort by the uber-wealthy cretins of the world. Perhaps more insulting than that is the way these influencers encouraged artists of all kinds to hop in on the market, promising good returns. Much of this was in the form of spam emails and promotions which circulated in an identical manner to many online scams, complete with many automated accounts designed to spam just about everyone. In truth, this was not going to serve any benefit for actual artists. This was only proven soon afterwards when almost all the profit came from copy-pasted pixel punks and bored apes, with only minor cosmetic variation between them. In other words, butt ugly trash that appears to be entirely artless. This is only worsened by the influx of stolen art cropping up on platforms like OpenSea, with takedowns becoming harder to make without resorting to the DMCA. This has the adverse effect of needing to enter personal information for legal reasons, which if leaked could put the rightful claimant in danger of being doxxed. The army of bored apes naturally don't seem to care about that, and would rather attack those who oppose their fragile cult and their nonsense ideology, many of which on social media using the same lingo, which is a common trait of cult behavior. From my perspective, they're actually devaluing art from those who put the proper work in, and promote the lifeless nature of their McDonald's menu items as status symbols. It's really no surprise at all that corporations and celebrities latched onto this trend, furthering the disconnect between them and the general population. I fail to see any value in these carbon-copied JPEGs. Oh, and speaking of carbon, you may be thinking, oh, no big deal. Their investment may be stupid, but at least it's harmless, right? Well, about that. Mining of crypto and the minting of NFTs are predominantly powered by high-energy consuming computer GPUs, components that have been in short supply for a while, in large part due to them being scalped for this exact purpose. And as the world still relies mainly on fossil fuel for our energy production, the high energy output produced by those processors leads to an absurd amount of CO2 emissions, further polluting the earth and escalating climate change. While it hasn't been verified how much energy the task of crypto processes takes, some reports have said that the energy use exceeds the yearly output of most countries, or what a singular person uses in a lifetime. For the sake of fairness, I can't determine how accurate these measurements are. Those figures could be greatly exaggerated to boost the impression that the crypto economy will end the livelihood of this planet. Even still, that doesn't mean you should write off those concerns. And I don't think it matters if they do become energy efficient. I still find it to be a moronic waste of both energy and economic investment. That's what pandemic brain fog and toxic greedy optimism does to those whose minds are conditioned by potential profits. I see them as no different than most other corporate-backed pyramid schemes. And by the way, much of the same can be said for the equally pretentious and heavily connected Metaverse project, which is essentially just virtual reality but distorted from the lens of criminally rich venture capitalists. Admittedly, I've been caring a lot less about this problem lately, especially as their relevance looks to slowly be petering out. Not to mention that a lot of those virtuous against them tend to be just as annoying, if not more so than the crypto bros themselves. I don't need to be reminded how bad they are every 10 seconds, and we don't need a trillion gimmick accounts about it, you preachy twits. Besides, I have bigger concerns to worry about than a militant but ineffective cabal of currency weirdos. Okay, so this next section was expressing my concern towards a piece of internet legislation dubbed the Earn It Act. Basically a bill that would've, theoretically, bypassed encryption and posed a threat to user privacy. This bill in particular failed to make much ground and is likely dead now, and any similar future bills in its wake are irrelevant to the discussion, so this portion will be skipped. This about ends the general review on stuff that happened in the year. Now to discuss it from a more personal lens. I'll start by saying that from how I experienced it, 2021 was actually worse than the year before, which is a bit strange considering I didn't experience any real loss compared to 2020. A lot of these dark thoughts can be attributed with feelings of isolation and depression, plus a lower confidence in my abilities. Oh, and I can't forget a strong case of pandemic boredom, which only hurt my mental health more. February was probably the high point of the year for me, which sucks as it is the shortest month. March, however, was when the shit really hit the fan, and I've struggled to recover since then. This was right around the time news about the NFT phenomenon overwhelmed me, and I reacted extremely towards it through the spring and summer months. And you can tell it was bad, though my state of mind was already declining before this discovery. Oh boy, there's a lot I'm going to be skipping over here, but I will provide some form of summary for all of this. First thing I'll mention was with a piece of animator controversy which made the rounds in early March involving the cartoonist Horsefolder, otherwise known as Jacob Lenstar. Most of this was centered around claims of threatening a colleague in 2015 and transphobic remarks. remarks. I don't feel like going in depth, since this drama is more or less over with, and one figure who made the call-out thread made amends. To summarize though, I had sided against Jacob initially, and the news of his actions did factor into my poor mental state that month. Upon reflection though, where some of it turned out to be defamation months later, that also left me frustrated. While a majority of this is being skipped, I still think my conclusion for this part is worth highlighting. Unfortunately, during that moment, I did grow slightly paranoid about plenty of my favorite content creators turning out to be like the enemy Lenstar was portrayed as. When event-fueled callouts spread as frequently as they do, viewers tend to react irrationally to all that drama. Part of me feels that's why it was orchestrated in the first place. The community wanted someone to lynch in the name of moral justice. I'll reiterate this again. Cancel culture isn't a myth. The only reason it's seen as one is because it only works on targets who don't have a widespread influence. J.K. Rowling or whoever can say whatever bigoted shit they want, and they'll still be able to retain mainstream status. Lenstar was only popular in small circles, so his cancellation was easy to persuade his community towards. Alright, so this next bit's a real doozy. There was a portion of the video which discussed an artist I had concerns for in early 2021. I am keeping them anonymous for obvious reasons. Simply put, this is the part of the video I regret including the most, because I expressed some stuff at the time relating to it which got a little too personal. I think the segment itself pretty much sums up how this went. Probably wasn't the wisest thing to be so vocal about it. Yeah, best I left that topic alone, and I apologize for mentioning it in the first place. At the very least, the final thoughts sum up my issues with this and the previous one pretty well. Overall, I think both of the aforementioned cases illustrate how bad dedication to your inspirations can get, both showing equally toxic sides of the same issue. Granted, much of my depression and insecurities are linked directly to a lack of progression in my life during the year, along with a sense of loneliness and detachment that I won't touch on much as it's a little too personal for me to share. The uneventful nature and declining hope during the year only worsened how I felt, and I think it's severely evident that my creative drive's been in the gutter because of it. Spurts of motivation were so uncommon that it led to numerous projects either being held back or canned altogether, and nowhere does that show more clearly than with my video output. Ignoring the previous year's review, a failed art time-lapse experiment, and an unfunny April Fool's series of rants, only 3 videos were actually produced for the entire year, the last one of which actually being a follow-up to the one before it, so make that 2.5. Notice the 10-month-long gap between the SlayerCoon commentary and the rant template rundown. My motivation for those projects wasn't at all consistent, especially when the production time of both is so vastly different even ignoring the change in length. I should also mention that for much of the year leading into the present, my editing software would bug out with imported videos and other assets. Originally it would just not play back video correctly, but would soon glitch out to where nothing would display in the preview after enough changes were made in the editor. Crashes involving OpenGL were common when this first happened, but even upgrading my drivers failed to fix the issue I wanted gone. This would soon become more annoying after I found out rendering was also dysfunctional, resulting in me having to pre-render damn near every video and composite shot that was used on the timeline. But besides extending the editing process and temporarily devouring my storage, it was an effective solution. Either way, it played a key role as to why it took so long to get some videos finished, and worsened my procrastination. I should be lucky that this isn't a job of mine. The same curse also affected my art productivity, though tech issues had no role this time around. Lowering confidence in my artistic abilities only made things worse, feeling like I haven't progressed quickly enough despite what I have achieved. That naturally led to less art being made, especially during my lowest points. Some months I would only complete a single drawing, as I felt obligated to stick to a minimum of 1 per month. Gee, I can only wonder why that was. Admittedly, that stress was self-inflicted, and I hope to fix that by keeping up some productivity moving forward in that field. I appear to have succeeded in that at least for a few weeks recently. A mild relief from the creative drought, but I can already sense it returning. That's about all the significant stuff I've got to say regarding my year, but there's still a few smaller things I have left to say before reviewing my content output. During the month of May, I would officially depart from Instagram roughly as soon as I entered, despite moderate levels of success. What more can I say about it other than the fact I never intended to head there? No thanks to the literal cyborg who owns the fucking thing. Not to mention I couldn't continue using it beyond moral reasons due to the app not working well on my phone. Probably wouldn't be so bad if I had the choice to upload to a PC during the time I joined. Then again, that would not save me from the annoying image cropping, which I had to remedy by editing some of the drawings to have expanded canvas space. It just wasn't worth the effort of making sure at least the main focus was fully viewable, and I'm surprised people put up with it. Twitter crop may have sucked, but at least it was only a problem for the preview rather than on the whole. The account isn't necessarily fully dead, but I only log on there once in a blue moon. I was also considering retiring from DeviantArt as well in the summer. That was partly due to a serious memory error related to my browser cookies that led to the site becoming a huge resource hog after just a minute of the site being opened. It took me months to figure out what the problem was, as I previously assumed it was added tech bug which caused the sluggish performance. The other reason of mine was a bit more serious and related more towards the controversy of their parent company Wix's potential ties to Palestinian genocide. Oh dear. Considering the current geopolitical situation with Palestine right now, this was actually ahead of the curve, and some of my thoughts have not aged well as a result. To make a long story short, that claim was not only nonsensical, but also xenophobic in hindsight. I'll just say that despite some consideration, I didn't give in to such pressure to leave DeviantArt at the time. Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that my year ended in a sickness, one that would also kick off 2022. It's nothing compared to what I had the year before, but it was still a blow to my holiday spirit. I was fearing I caught COVID during that time, and I was never tested to be sure. Whatever I did get didn't affect me that seriously, at least. I admit I've been in a negative tone throughout most of this. Perhaps I have no right to be, since I've got it good compared to many. Sorry if I've been unbearable in this regard lately, and that's speaking beyond this video. I generally don't like that my thought process functions in such a way, and I need help in healing that. Here isn't the best place to seek advice though. Social media loves to target the vulnerable. As gloomy as things may be for me, and likely so for a lot of other people, I don't want to keep repeating the vicious cycle of doomer thinking. It's best to cherish those good moments and try to make them last. Besides, I'm a firm believer that every year has its share of positive experiences, and 2021 was no exception. Most notably, it was the year where I started getting into playing retro games for legal means. Whew. Just gotta make sure the big gaming companies and retro purists aren't watching this. Overused jokes aside, emulation of old school hardware has a plethora of benefits, and since we live in a bubble economy where game prices are overinflated and out of reach for most, playing many old games through conventional means is growing harder for those of lower wealth who have now just gained interest. Real hardware still remains the best way to play these games, but having that stuff preserved and more accessible has far more pros than cons. It isn't like the gaming overlords are gonna re-release a majority of these old titles. No company will ever have the motives to revive something obscure like Bokusuka Wars or Roll Cage, especially within the gacha-heavy, intrusively monetized always-online era of now. Preservation is taken for granted, and that shall never change even as the technology evolves. Art-wise, 2021 was also a year filled with highlights. Even during some of my downer moods and insecurities as an artist, I look back on what I've made and feel proud of what I've accomplished. That alone often helped me temporarily escape the dread I was experiencing. The year saw a greater emphasis on developing my own characters, which took up a majority of the output made. This included a couple pieces inspired by story concepts I was brainstorming, though I must admit that much of that creative spark came early in the year. My biggest of these experiments was with this dumb little comic I made that also introduced a new character to my lineup. Not sure exactly what I should call him still. He kinda looks like a rejected and washed up Pokemon sword to me. One drawing has labeled him as an iguana, but he also seems more frog and gecko-like. Perhaps he's an amalgamation of sorts, I don't know. A new character was also crafted early on, though their design is still yet to be figured out, and I only drew them once for the entire year. Probably the first character of mine to start with more of a purpose beyond being some silly design I doodled. If you are by any chance interested in my characters and want to learn more about them, I'll link a Google Doc which provides bios for nearly all of them, plus a story outline for a series concept I considered. Keep in mind that this remains a work in progress, so some details are bound to change in the months ahead. Also, for whatever reason, I made a lot of shitpost art. Many of these came from Gartic Phone prompts that I would play with pals over on Discord. One of them I decided to give the polished redraw treatment. Tinko, what is my life? And finally, we get to discussing the video material. I don't need to reiterate how little was produced, but I do consider both to be a jump in quality over last year's content. Just a shame that I didn't utilize my new microphone much during its first year of use. The Slayer commentary felt like a nice change of pace, covering something that was fresh but still vaguely familiar. Whereas with relentlessly reused rants, that topic's been one I've naturally had a long history with and a lot to comment on without feeling stale. By no means would I consider my analysis flawless, but I think my understanding of the topic and its history made the video a lot better. That along with the video's compilation format served far better in highlighting the wacky world of rant template abusers than the usual surface level complaints. In the right hands, just about anything can provide a cavalcade of noteworthy commentary. Its follow-up regarding one of the most infamous of the Go commentators was also a worthwhile discussion, shining a light on the infighting and attempted deplatforming their community engaged in. I may have been a little too hyperbolic at times though, especially as Kaiser's channel remained up contrary to their claims and hopes of the activation. But aside from those moments and the event not aging well, it did provide more insight on Kaiser's strong opposition and their delusions. And to the fellow lizard dude who shares his first name, I deeply apologize that you had to put up my anxiety-inducing rant. Remind myself to never mention that goon again, or any other infamous people with similar names. This next part went over future ideas for videos I had on the mind, which given it's been 2 years since that video dropped, will be skipped given this doesn't hold much relevance in the present. And that covers just about everything I've got to say regarding my belated thoughts on 2021. As a whole, the year might have been a marginal improvement over its predecessor, but on a personal level, it felt a tad worse in many regards. Anyways, I hope you found some enjoyment in my prolonged ramblings. Be sure to stay tuned for future projects, and I'll provide community updates here on YouTube relating to their progress. Be sure to subscribe and hit that musical instrument to stay up to date as well. Ones who fancy my art can support me on a variety of different platforms, including Twitter, which is my general place for whatever nonsense I make or say. Twitter's out, man. Use Blue Sky instead. Follow that at your own risk, though. It's a war zone out there. We'll see y'all again whenever the next video drops. Take good care of yourselves for the remainder of 2022. It's very important. Not as important as sniffing roaches' bags. True that, Gumpers. True that. Anyways, see y'all next time.